All right, Sam. Hello and welcome back to the Tempest.
Hey, hello, Jack.
All right. Well, in the wake of the Super Bowl, which was last night, I think we all have one burning question on our mind, and that is Tom Brady a member of the proletarian class? Is he a working class individual? Is he on our side in the class struggle?
Uh, I can't decide if I should answer seriously or try to make a joke. I I saw a Jacobin article that asked this question genuinely from 2017, and they say that people in the music industry are workers too. But you know what? I'm gonna say that professional athletes and musicians and stuff like that prove that the working class does not exist because in order for it to exist, workers must first have class consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I didn't think of anything funny to say.
No, so you're saying that no, Tom Brady is not.
Labor aristocracy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that brings up the question of actually is going back to the NBA strike. Does that count as a workers' movement? The fact, I mean, I guess the argument always goes like, well, these people they're not like wage workers as we would see in like the factories, but they're essentially generating surplus value for the team owners.
Yeah.
In the same way that a factory worker would be.
I mean, these guys do, they give away the best years of their lives, and a lot of instances they end up with severe,
Well, in Tom Brady's case, that's decades.
I mean, and in Rob Gronkowski's case, it's like it made him less than functioning as a human being. Like he probably can't even read anymore.
Yeah, yeah, 'cause he's only 31.
Yeah, but he's had more concussions than anybody in the world. So at the NBA strike, I think that was more along the lines of racial justice, and I still think that it was a good thing, and it's still really funny that Obama told them to shut up and dribble.
Yeah, that was a bad one. That was a bad look for Obama. Anyway, yeah, cue theme.
Yeah, sure, I guess. Yeah, we're doing this again. No, I'm just... Okay. I'm kidding. I'm so excited to be back.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Super Bowl?
I thought Okay, I'm not a sports guy. Football never really was my thing. I mean, it's a decent sport, all of that. It was really funny just watch the Chiefs get absolutely demolished.
Yeah.
It was embarrassing.
Yeah. I mean, they did win the year before, so it's not like, we should, feel bad for them. What did you think of that Jeep commercial? Do you remember it?
Yeah, I remember the Jeep commercial. That's the one that's drawing headlines. What is it? It's like 2 minutes of middle America porn narrated by Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah,
the cross imagery.
I didn't know it was narrated by Bruce until after.
Yeah, that was him in the ad. He's old.
It just, again, we shouldn't really even be surprised. I mean, there's always going to be people out there that argue that the center, the quote-unquote political center, which is by nature difficult and impossible to define, is somehow the only moral, acceptable, political belief system by virtue of being in the middle.
I mean, watching that ad, all of us were laughing about how obscenely right-wing evangelical American it was.
Mm-hmm.
The right completely rejected it because Bruce Springsteen is a Democrat from New Jersey.
Yeah, he's a big-time liberal guy.
Yeah. And so that ad didn't work for anyone.
Yeah, no, yeah, like he wrote, "Born in the USA," which is the anti-Vietnam song, and like it sort of like proves that this center that's supposed to hold is really not appealing to anybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the way that the ad went in sort of its vague like affirmations of like holding the center of America, just sickeningly earnest for an advertisement trying to sell me an upper middle income car.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There's like no one in America that's, I guess there probably are people in America that feel this way still, but like watching that ad, it's hard to imagine a time when people would have seen like all that imagery and been like, yes, this is America. This is great.
Yeah,
I mean, this is the ideal country, is like all the open space, the open prairie, like the little church out there, like driving through a nowhere town in like the Midwest or whatever.
That like also just alienates like the vast overwhelming majority of Americans. Like I'm not even talking about like just white people. Like most white people like live in cities and stuff now too. So it's like
yeah, all those images that like I guess for Springsteen's generation may have been like the American dream are now to most people just associated with like American decline and like the decay of the working class. It's not like a positive image anymore. It's not something that we see and be like, yes, I'm proud to be an American. It's like, wow, look at how our country is like failing, and it's like these classic patriotic nationalist sort of images just are empty now.
Yeah, and but we've said this before. All politics is now is cultural signifiers, and historically there's sort of been like this unspoken agreement that that this ad appealed to Middle America, and I think that's because the Super Bowl used to be like Middle America's thing, and like everybody else had the Oscars. If you weren't like a working class Republican living in the middle of nowhere,
it's the two genders.
Yeah,
the Super Bowl and the Oscars.
Yeah, exactly. And now sort of like it's been like I obviously I don't want to imply that like the Super Bowl belonged to those people, but like it sort of was taken like. It's been adapted into the mainstream completely. Like, everybody watches it now. And, like, that's why they had The Weeknd on.
I'm thinking of a tweet with, like, the clap emojis. If you are not from Middle America, do not watch the Super Bowl. My culture is not your costume.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's totally right. We all watched it, and we're like, privileged little college kids that didn't watch the regular season at all, barely.
Yeah,
most of us.
Yeah, only the Eagles games.
Yeah, and
even then that was.
I turned those off because they were bad and they were hard to watch.
No, absolutely. Well, I think that brings us.
This is semi-related.
No, I was thinking in terms of like the sincerity put into that Jeep commercial, and how like even an ounce of cynicism just tears right through it. I think that brings us nicely to our topic of how poisoned politics have been emotionally and like in terms of authenticity. Yeah.
We need to approach this conversation carefully because this is not an episode about AOC drama. We didn't get involved in the force the vote Jimmy Dore thing, and while a lot of I think left wing Twitter is poisoned with like should you like AOC and why? We're going to stay out of that because that is stupid discourse, I think, that doesn't produce anything good or useful. And we're not going to be talking about AOC. Well, the conversation is kind of adjacent to it, but we're going to do our best to not make this a referendum on AOC talking about her experience during the Capitol riot.
Yeah, we want to sort of like separate this conversation of like authenticity and like authentic emotion in politics from like just the discourse.
Yeah. And whether or not you're like on her side or not, AOC did engage in like empathy politics, and I guess the conversation now has to be like, I don't find that acceptable when my opponents try to use it. If you're like a centrist Democrat or a Republican, like I get like annoyed and I roll my eyes. So should anybody use it? What really is it? And like how like should it be approached by people? I think empathy politics as a whole, like politicians co-opting the language of like things like trauma, lived experience, and what are terms that are supposed to be associated with like when you're talking about marginalized people and marginalized identities are suddenly being used by politicians who are by nature of being a politician much more privileged than the average person.
Yeah, it's in this way. It's this sort of like sick weaponization of a lot of these terms that have like actual meaning for a lot of people and like actually represent like real lived experience for a lot of people being sort of like warped and turned on their head by like the political discourse. And I think that anyone who's spent any time on Twitter will definitely recognize a lot of the things that we'll be discussing, because it has become like disgustingly prevalent to see terms like gaslighting, trauma. What are the other good ones that you see?
Lived experience is a big one. But I mean, like, people think, if you think this should just be like ignored or disregarded, I would remind you that Elizabeth Warren's entire 2020 campaign was just arguing that if you don't vote for me, you're gaslighting me. Like, that's pretty much like all she seemed to believe in.
Yeah, and it's the sort of the fact that like these terms, when utilized by like, I'm not saying that a senator or a representative, in a lot of cases, can't,
or a vice president
can't have like trauma, lived experience, and all of that. But it divorces it from like the reality of a lot of people when it's these individuals with immense power are using sort of these expressions as a means to the end of achieving their political ambitions or their political ends.
I mean, you're like, think about who like is in power right now and who, like, by expanding this like discourse to like lose all of its meaning. Like, think about who you're giving these weapons to. Like, do you want like say like Liz Cheney to be able to like use these terms? Like, I experienced a lot of trauma when a lot of people told me and my father should be sent to jail for war crimes.
Yeah, and I think one thing, let's take it back in administration first.
Certainly.
Just go back to the the last 4 years that we can't escape from. And I think more so than like empathy politics with that, we saw a lot of grievance politics. It was the politics of complaining.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was annoying, but it was ultimately very banal.
Are you thinking of like, is it from the perspective of like Trump's candidacy?
I'm thinking like on all sides. A lot of liberals towards Trump, Trump towards liberals, Trump towards the media towards Trump. It was a lot of complaining.
Like, would you say, when you say complaining and grievance politics, my first thought is like the people who like, a bunch of I wasn't a Nazi until you told me I was, that type of person. I wasn't a Nazi until you told me I was a Nazi.
No, I'm
like that.
What I'm mostly thinking of is the entire like, oh, you can't say that. That's not fair. I'm being treated unfairly. You're not giving me the respect I deserve.
Right. And again, in 2020 in the Democratic primary field, I think pretty much every candidate used that to some extent. When you criticize Joe Biden for saying something insanely weird and or racist, he has a stutter, and he's a disabled person. Like, people are like claiming he's the same as like a paraplegic who can't afford healthcare.
And I think that's another piece that comes with this that we like touched on earlier, is the false equivalencies that exist in this kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. I think comparing Joe Biden to any meaningfully like disabled person is pretty dangerous. And if you're offended by this, you keep forgetting. He's the president of the United States. He's in no meaningfully way like oppressed. He's literally the least oppressed person on Earth right now. I think that's a fair. I think that's a fair title to give the president of the United States. The same thing with Trump. For 4 years, he was the least oppressed person on Earth.
No, absolutely, and yeah, it's not like some convoluted like, I guess like a convoluted network that like leads them to power, or some like hidden power or whatever that they have. No, these people are very obviously the most powerful people in the world.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Kamala Harris too. She's
it's
the
not
vice
even
president.
it's not even like class privilege, race privilege, any of those sort of things that people like to discuss. It is clearly and obviously the privilege of being the executive of the United States or a member of like the legislature.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Totally. So, how then should like people who analyze politics approach this? Approach sort of seeing like fact checking a politician is like the same as gaslighting them. How like do you think that first of all, do you think that other than like being mocked on Twitter, will this translate to like real things in the future if it continues in the process of like this pretty much using the vernacular of sociology and using it for politicians to like weaponize empathy politics? Do you think empathy politics will become a larger phenomenon, especially as we're facing like we're looking down the barrel of a gun of 4 years of like what I call girl boss politics, as they try to drum up Kamala 2024. We're going to be seeing a lot of
like the return to the Clinton.
Yes,
sort of.
I think the Hillary Clinton campaign strategy of girl boss politics, we destroyed Libya and we did it wokely,
Yeah, we did it in the pantsuit.
Yeah. This will this phenomenon become a viable political threat to like people who are actually trying Bernie supporters? Because let's face it, it was weaponized against Bernie supporters by pretty much everyone else, and I say Bernie supporter really because that's the only thing to refer to someone who's left of the Democratic Party but also still wants to participate in the U.S. electoral process.
No, you can say the word, Sam. You can say Bernie, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. That was gaslighting. That was gas.
Well, now you're doing it.
No, we were gaslit into thinking we were all white men when Bernie received the majority of his donations from women and had more support from POC than white people in the primary in 2020 at least.
Yeah, no, and honestly, I think that what this leads to like an ultimate conclusion of with like this sort of empathy politics is it sort of meets a brick wall with like the politics of cynicism or just like bad faith politics. Now, and I was saying it earlier to you, but anytime I like read Ted Cruz's Twitter feed, like I roll my eyes, like, oh god, is this actually what he's saying? Like, continue scrolling through. It's just nonsense. It's all like bad faith takes. Like, it would be hard to imagine someone like actually believing the shit he says on his Twitter.
Yeah, you're saying he's like a huge hypocrite who
Yeah.
like stands for absolutely nothing, never argues in good faith.
Yeah, it is like the point of him tweeting isn't to make a point, it's to antagonize someone that's making a point.
Yeah, like his beef with Seth Rogen.
Yeah, or even like AOC, he'll always like she'll say something and he'll always be like right there in the comments. It's like an AOC reply guy, like, well, actually, poor people should starve.
To use more of a street term, she lives rent free in his head.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it's exactly that sort of thing that I think is going to become the divide if this keeps up, is because the empathy politics are very much aligned with like the Democratic Party, and we've seen some of it across the aisle, but it is very much sort of in tune with the sort of like identity aspect of liberalism that have become very prevalent in the Democratic Party. And again, I think the opposition is just going to be this absolute bad faith politics by your Josh Hawleys, your Rep Masseys, your Rand Pauls. I mean, like, you want to know what, like, a bad faith piece of legislation looks like? I think it was earlier today, Representative Massey introduced a bill that was one sentence, and it was just eliminate the Department of Education.
Cool.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of those things like, yeah, he's trying to make a point, he's a libertarian or whatever, but it's bad faith legislation. It is.
Is it bad faith because he knows it's going to fail? Is it bad faith because it doesn't have like a plan to like to follow up when the Department of Education is replaced?
It's not a plan. It's not going to pass. He's doing it because it's going to he knows it's going to piss people off. It's him basically just like trying to jab the authority, or like the prevailing authorities, which are the Democrats at this time, to no avail and to no end other than to piss them off.
Yeah, to waste congressional time, yada yada. Yeah. And like imagine like, you know, like Thomas Macy's constituency, whatever, you know, gerrymandered abandoned coal mine that is in Kentucky, like whatever. You know, I don't think anybody is like for the elimination of the Department of Education. Like, in truth, like they might say they're for it if you're like, but like once that's explained to you what that would result in, they immediately are like, oh well, you know, I send my kid to a public school.
It's like it's the 16-year-old with like the suit on and like the ANCAP flag behind him.
Yeah, I should rephrase that. I would bet, you know, dollars or donuts, every single one of Thomas Macy's constituents, you know, if they say they're for getting rid of the Department of Education, if you like explain to them what they would lose, they would become against it. Like that's, you know, my.
Yeah, and it's like the same thing with your Dan Crenshaws, your Steven Crowders, your Matt Gaetz. It's their political ideology isn't based on some sort of like conservative doctrine. It's based on like, oh, the liberals are gonna hate this.
Yeah,
it's like the liberal tears sort of phenomena.
Yeah, and I guess that is kind of closely linked with like a Trump phenomenon. I think, you know, I would counter that with like we've seen, you know, examples of conservative like outrage culture since the 1990s when things like the War on Christmas were invented.
Yeah, and
would you say this is like the progression of that now? Is that really like they've abandoned like believing in anything just to antagonize, like just to, you know, make fun of institutional liberalism?
It's almost as though like their critiques of like the liberal establishment and I guess PC, like quote unquote PC culture and like liberal snowflakes, they've become like the perfect mirror to it, where they themselves are getting offended at the mere thought of someone taking offense. And it's this constant churning machine where it's like, now, basically the two sides are the same thing reflected. And I think it's no wonder that, like, you look at Thomas Massey and, like, Ted Cruz and recognize, oh, these are, like, the most hated people in politics. The other people in their party do not like them. People, like, they'll work together or whatever, but they are not well liked by anyone.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that's where the Democrats' sort of like empathy politics are better, or like work better to some degree. I mean, you look at Kamala Harris, who often utilized a lot of that sort of thing, especially when talking about her experience. She had like detractors, but she's not like loathed in the same way that like Ted Cruz is by her fellow like Democrats.
Yeah, yes, that's true.
I put emphasis on Democrats because I know some people that wouldn't call themselves Democrats may in fact loathe Kamala Harris.
Well, I think, you know, Kamala is, you know, a good example of this because her, if you remember, her like biggest moment in the primary was telling Joe Biden, "I was that little girl," when they were talking about segregation of busing. And yeah, we can laugh at that now because, you know, look how that all turned out. But another thing that's important to note is that Kamala like never got above 7% in, opinion polling, and had to drop out before a single vote was cast. Nobody voted for Kamala Harris in the primary. And I think, Elizabeth Warren also tried to, wield this. I think, as, I don't want to, it has nothing to do with them being women. I want to put that out there right now, obviously. Pete Buttigieg did it too, to a lesser extent, I think. It's just that wasn't the most obvious thing about him. That's why, he sort of got under the radar. I think all Democrats do it at this point. I think it's a viable, so yeah, it has nothing to do with them being women. These are two very good examples. Elizabeth Warren, came in third in her own state. This empathy politics seems to be deeply, deeply unpopular with, people who vote.
I don't even necessarily think it's unpopular. I just think it's so passive that, it gets overwhelmed by stronger messages. I mean,
Yeah, I shouldn't have said unpopular. I should have said it doesn't translate to, real political support. And do you think that's because people would rather participate in, the outrage politics of Ted Cruz? Or do you think it's because empathy politics has never been wielded properly by, someone who could actually go and be not voting for me is an act of violence. My trauma will carry me to the White House.
I mean, I don't know about that, but if there is one person who absolutely can toe the line and sort of work the empathy politics in a way that people find actually appealing, that's AOC. We mentioned her at the top, and we don't want to get into the whole is AOC representing the left and all of that. That's a whole mess of discourse. But I think if there is a Democrat that can perfectly balance the sort of populist and legislation driven argument as well as this sort of identity one, it is AOC. AOC is probably going to be the future of the Democratic Party as long as Nancy Pelosi doesn't end up living for another 30 years and staying Speaker of the House. But I think when you look at the people who have been able to message effectively, lay out policy effectively, and in some cases, despite failures on other ones, actually be able to leverage that as political power. I think you see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the model for this kind of politics, and again we start to see it even more with the newer members of the squad and people of similar political persuasions joining her in Congress and the younger generations. I just don't think that people above the age of 40 are able to really do this.
Yeah, well, let me be clear. You calling her AOC is an act of violence. It's Congresswoman Cortez to you.
Noted.
But do you think that means she? And you're right. It's so early to even talk about this. But if she did try to assume the mantle of this emerging leftist flank in the Democratic Party, would she be more successful than Bernie, or do you think she would have to swap one for the other? Because I think the reason she's so good at empathy politics is because she does, talk about herself a lot, and she's faced criticism for that, but she does also still appeal to people who believe in a larger movement and what you talked about, this legislative driven, progressive, cause, and she is able to. I don't think we know yet if she's as effective as Bernie was, because she hasn't really gone nationwide yet.
Yeah.
Campaigning wise, I mean, she's obviously become a household name.
Yeah, she hasn't left her district campaign wise.
Yeah, but I think the appeal of the Bernie Sanders campaign was that it generated empathy and sympathy for other people. Do you think and I think that's sort of why she can do it and get a pass almost, because she does employ empathy politics for personal political gain, and I can't really fault her for do that, because that's the game in town right now. You kind of if you can do it effectively, I guess you gotta, but
well, I guess
she's able to generate empathy for other people is the point I'm trying to hammer at too.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point that you brought up that I think we should definitely explore more, is the idea that AOC may be able to like generate the empathy politics like for herself, but what she and Bernie had in common is like they were able to sort of promote empathy for other people. And I mean, we haven't mentioned like Bernie that much in this episode, and I think it'd be interesting to look at his campaign and how empathy played a role in that. But what it was is like, think of his slogan. It's like, fight for someone you don't know. This wasn't empathy for like Bernie Sanders, the candidate. This was like, have compassion for your fellow Americans. Like, we're all in this together. It was like a solidarity sort of movement. And I think that falls into like this empathy politics and is a form of empathy politics. But I think that is far stronger than like the sort of cynicism you see on the right, and that's where I think you see Elizabeth Warren fall short, you see Kamala Harris fall short, is a lot of or even Pete Buttigieg, where a lot of this sort of discussion was centered around the candidate, but Bernie Sanders focused this conversation more so on like other people, like your fellow Americans. And I think we did see some of that in like the Warren campaign, but so much of the Warren campaign got caught up in like the whole personality game.
They made it all about her. They tried to turn her into, they're like, you're voting for Hermione Granger when you vote for Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, and as we always should note, Twitter is not real life, but it certainly colors our view of reality and a lot of people's view of reality. I mean, it's an incredibly small amount of the population is on Twitter, but almost all journalists are.
Yeah.
And that's...
all political operatives are.
Yes, so whether or not you're on Twitter doesn't matter. The people you listen to, watch, vote for are on Twitter, and they're terminally online.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, and I don't think we can talk about this empathy politics without talking about really the way Bernie was treated. And you might say, yeah, Twitter's not real life, but the discourse about Bernie and like how he was personally attacking Hillary Clinton for running against her, and later they turned it into like Warren and like all the female candidates and, you know, etc., about how he's like a violently, even after the freaking inauguration of Joe Biden, when, you know, it was officially over, Bernie Sanders is not gonna like mess with the Democrats in any meaningful way. Like, they were still saying like, he, like, that, you know, high school teacher wrote that article that was like, Bernie Sanders is a white supremacist because he became, the meme took over Joe Biden's inauguration, the meme of Bernie, like, because like,
yeah. And I don't know if I've said this before, but saying that Joe Biden's inauguration was a major step forward for women and people of color is, yes, there may be something to that, but I think you have to take a step back and like think about that phrase in and of itself. The inauguration of Joe Biden is a step forward for like women and people of color. The central figure of that is Joe Biden.
Yeah,
ultimately it is Kamala Harris is VP. Yes, they're bringing all sorts of people in the cabinet, and in many ways it is like a step forward for a lot of people.
If Joe Biden's inauguration is the biggest event of the last 20 years, if it is this monumental like achievement of for women of color and, you know, disabled people, and throw whatever you want in there, if that is the case, then we have failed so terribly as a society that we should all be collectively shot into the sun. We are the most pathetic species that will ever live if this was the most important event of the last 20 years. What is the point of us if any of that shit they say is true?
Yeah, here's the thing. If you are seeing the inauguration of Joe Biden and like all of this going on as the finish line for whatever social movement you're participating in, you probably need to do some like serious reevaluation of like your principles, because Joe Biden becoming president of the United States instead of Donald Trump getting elected for a second term isn't like the end of everything. This is like basically you being given a second chance. Like, this isn't like, oh, we finally did it, we fixed everything. No, this is God himself coming down and saying like, okay, You messed it up the first time. Don't fuck it up again.
That is, you're the first. It's the first time I ever heard that put that way. Like, think of this as a second chance, and I guess that makes me feel a little bit better about the situation we're in. But since we've moved on to the inauguration, and that article that was written that called Bernie a white supremacist because he took the spotlight during the inauguration, I want to say. Amber Frost of Chapa Trap House makes a genius point, and that the reason why this empathy politics is so popular from like the liberal establishment is because part of their sort of like belief system and like what they need for like this mandate is that they need to believe that they are like loved, and that's why you saw all this obsession about like what Michelle Obama and what Kamala Harris and what Jill Biden were wearing during the inauguration and all that stuff, like it was the red carpet pre-Oscar show, is that the neoliberal like establishment, and not the Republicans, not like Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. I think they've made their peace that millions of people hate them and want them to be in serious pain. But like the Democrat, like Obama and sort of like this Hillary Clinton girl boss politics, they need to like the part of their mandate is that they need to be like loved, and they are not loved, and that is like what like is a major like issue for them.
Yeah, no, and we all know how vain Donald Trump was and how like all he wanted was to be admired by people. Him having like a 35% approval rating would never have stopped him from doing some sort of heinous executive order. He's not waiting for like, oh, I need to hit 51% before I can do policy. No. He's sad that people don't like him, but he's still doing whatever it is he so sees fit.
Yeah. I probably shouldn't use Donald Trump as an example because he is sort of pathologically obsessed with people's opinions of him. That's literally why he ran for president.
Yeah, and that's why he became president.
Yeah, but like establishment Republicans like Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, they don't care if you love them or not. They would rather be respected and like administer their will upon people. But the Democratic establishment, your Elizabeth Warrens, your Pete Buttigieg's, they do need to fit. Like they believe that they should be loved. They believe that they are the most virtuous people. That they believe that they are your saviors. Elizabeth Warren entire campaign was like, I am the person with the plan, and I'm gonna and it is a pathological obsession with being like cherished, and like they aren't, because they represent forces in this country that are genuinely bad for millions of people, and nothing's like you can't write the 1990s crime bill and be upset when like people aren't ready to die for you the way they're ready to die for Donald Trump
or Bernie Sanders. Well, actually, do you remember what Hillary Clinton said in her documentary that like nobody likes Bernie Sanders?
Yes. Yeah.
And then you know what Bernie said? Well, I think my wife likes me.
Yeah, and like we got really far away from this, but like the treatment of Bernie is the most important thing to study, because here was a guy that was like just a genuine arbiter of like compassion and like a desire to see a sense of community restored in this country, and like a sense of love for your fellow human being. And like look at how he was treated. He was compared to Trump throughout the entirety of this political cycle from 2016 to 2020. He was called dangerously racist, violently misogynistic. Every ist, was hurled at him.
Yeah.
And believing that is insane. I think if you're listening to this show and you believe there's any truth to that at all, you are certifiably insane. Like there's no like get off the show. Like you need help.
Yeah, no, I think that if you see Bernie Sanders if you see him as someone dangerous or like stoking the populist flames or like gonna bring about the end of America, I think you need to like sit down and watch literally any interview with Bernie Sanders where you actually just see that he's just a sweet old man.
He's like not only that, but he's also just like a New Deal Democrat. So if you're afraid of like socialist revolution in the United States, you also need to get a grip. And like he admires FDR. Like
yeah, no, that's one thing in common with like a lot of communists that I know is like, wow, Bernie is like he's not that far left. He's like a moderate, basically, as far as they see him. They don't even think he's a real socialist. He's like a social democrat or whatever. But they'll still say, like, yeah, I like him. I voted for Bernie Sanders. I canvassed for Bernie Sanders. I donated money to Bernie Sanders. Because he's a compassionate and caring human being.
Yeah, and, like, he was the first, like, victim. I don't want to say victim. He was, like, a victim is a popular term they use. You know, I was a victim because you voted against the bill I proposed. But he was the first person to sort of be subjected to this empathy politics and, like, seeing it wielded as a political weapon. You know, like that MSNBC news anchor, whoever, was like, "Ooh, Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl. He's just so, like, evil and."
Oh, who was? I don't remember which one it was, but the MSNBC guy watching Bernie win the Iowa caucus, saying that it reminded him of seeing the Nazis march through Paris.
Oh, Chris Matthews. Yeah. Exactly. Like, this empathy politics was used to, like, hinder his candidacy. And while I ultimately don't think, like, it worked, I don't think, you know, people were going to the polls on Super Tuesday like, well, I was going to vote for Bernie, but he was just so unfair to Elizabeth Warren at the debate. But, like, they are still going to stick with it, I think. And I think, you know, if AOC, of all people, does run, it could be just as easily tried to, like, be used against her, like, somehow. They could find a way. And whoever challenges Kamala in the 2024 primary is going to, like...
Yeah, God help them.
Yeah. They are going to be painted as, like, as Adolf Hitler. And, like, it doesn't matter who they are. Could you imagine if Tulsi Gabbard runs against Kamala in the 2024 primary?
I don't know about Gabbard. I think she might just be a Republican now.
I don't think, like, but even if, like, she, like, stays as a Democrat and tries to run again, could you imagine how they're going to, like, treat her? She'll literally be, like, assassinated. She'll be the next political assassination. It'll be done by some, like, rabid pussy hat wearing. Yeah, like, that would be the most insane thing ever.
Yeah. No, it's very hard to say what the future will hold, but I think that when it comes down to it, the reason I have faith in Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is because she does stand for a lot of the same things Bernie does, but she also has that, like, grasp of liberal politics. I mean, that's one thing. You'll see, like, Warren supporters, yeah, they'll like AOC. Kamala supporters, yeah, they also like AOC. Joe Biden supporters don't exist. But other than that, she is a very popular figure in the Democratic Party. Granted, there are a lot of older, more conservative people that do harbor hard feelings against her, and conservatives absolutely loathe her.
Yeah.
But no, I hate to say that, like, she's the synthesis of these two kinds of politics we see in the Democratic Party, or at least on the left. But that is largely what I think she could represent in the future. And it's always dangerous to, like, have hope, as we know, as we're rounding the 1-year anniversary of Iowa. Hope is a dangerous thing to have.
Oh, we've passed it.
Yeah. Well, now we're rounding the 1-year anniversary of Nevada.
Oh, Jesus Christ. That, I'm going to be really sad on that day.
Yeah.
But I just want to... I am going to take the cynical approach to what you're saying, and I think that if you believe in the genuineness of AOC, which I still do, I think at this point in their careers, if you voted for Bernie in 2020, you should probably vote for AOC in 2020, or if she ever runs nationally, if she remains the same. But, all that being said, if she is a genuine threat to the establishment, they will still stop her. So I think if she wins, as crazy as this sounds, you should like be concerned, because that means that maybe she isn't, like, the same, that maybe she doesn't believe the same things that Bernie does, because
that's something I don't want to think about, is, like, the only Democrats who will win are the ones you should be skeptical of. So when the Democrat that you like wins, maybe you shouldn't have liked them all this time.
Wait, you mean it was all the establishment?
It was all neoliberal austerity? Always has been.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is a really morbid thought. I'm sorry for going there.
Well,
but,
now you ruined politics.
All right. Do you think that the sort of new street fight of the Democrats, empathy politics, versus the Republicans, what did we call it? Meanie politics, you know,
cynical,
yeah,
antagonistic.
Do you think that's to like hide the fact? Do you think that's a new effort to hide the fact that all of this stuff is like fake and doesn't matter, and that the two parties really just believe in the same things?
You mean it's to hide the fact that 97%, or not 97%, but 97 senators out of 100 voted to keep the capital of Israel, or not the capital, but keep the embassy of Israel in Jerusalem?
Yeah, or like the fact that like as far as we can tell now, Tony Blinken is just a skinnier, quieter version of Mike Pompeo. Like,
well, I wouldn't go quite that far.
We'll see.
Here's the thing. Is he as bad as some Republicans? Yeah, probably. Do I have like a special loathing in my heart for Mike Pompeo? Yes, that is absolutely true. I think you would be hard pressed to find a Secretary of State as bad as Mike Pompeo that's not named John Bolton.
Okay, fine, sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. If you want to go there, but I mean, like, again, that raises the question: is your hatred of Mike Pompeo, like, culturally, because he's a disgusting fat rube who is really annoying, and like, because like, let's face it, like, you should hate, like, if you like believe in like material reality, like politics of like whatever the outcome is like what matters. You should feel the same way about Ted Cruz as you would any other Republican, but because he's constantly on Twitter being like, like, I hate him. I said this before and I'll say it again. And even though I know it's because of cultural signifiers, I would accept Trump as president for life if Ted Cruz, like, never served another day in the U.S. Congress. And, like, that's because even though him and Trump being president would probably amount to, like, the same materially, like, Ted Cruz is uniquely, like, awful.
Yeah,
and, like,
loathsome. Yeah, no, and that's why I think it was a mistake to let people interact with politicians frequently on Twitter. That was never a good idea. Whoever thought that one up should be fired, but no.
That reminds me of the lost 10 minutes of our discussion with Doug.
Oh, yeah.
That will someday get released when we have a Patreon.
Yeah, that'll be a Patreon bonus episode eventually. But, no, yeah, no, I think absolutely that the fact that I now have to see Mike Pompeo's tweets in my feed every so often, or see Ted Cruz in my Twitter feed, has made them far more loathsome, and the fact that some people know how to behave themselves on Twitter while others don't has in many ways obfuscated, like, the actual just disgusting awfulness of some politicians, because instead of tweeting, like, I don't even remember what it was Ted Cruz was tweeting the other day, but instead of, like, tweeting, like, well, you snowflakes, actually, movies show us that environmentalists are bad. Instead of that, they're tweeting something like, oh, and today I said hi to some union workers.
Yeah.
And it's like that sort of nonsense. I guess it's not fair that I have to hate Ted Cruz even though, I don't know, Chuck Grassley or whatever is like saying hi to a steel mill worker or whatever on his Twitter feed.
Tweeting about like hanging out in Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
Doing Lord knows what.
Yeah, doing you know what in the Dairy Queen.
Yeah, and again, like, I sort of, like, seem like if you know, are, like, a strict, you know, materialist, like, I am, that sounded so pretentious, I'm sorry. But if you sort of, like, understand those things and that American politics is really about, like, maintaining the will of the ruling class, the elite, the bourgeoisie, capital, call them whatever you want, then, like, all of this is just, you know, a cultural distraction that's used to hide that fact, you know, from you.
Yeah, it's the rhetorical divide to hide the material.
Yeah, to hide the material outcome, yes. And, you know, I think that as long as you understand that, you can still have meaningful conversations about these, like, cultural, not real things,
yeah,
you know?
Lord knows we don't.
So, on a normal episode, do you have any closing thoughts on this?
No, I don't really have much more to say other than, yeah, we should do a policy episode sometime. We're doing a lot of like rhetorical analysis.
No, but okay, yes, but I think that's fun. I think our viewers probably like that more. I don't think they want to hear about like, Joe Biden signed Executive Order number 586 that makes it illegal to be a white man, and
Yeah. At some point we'll go through some policy information, but no, I think
this podcast is about having fun. We want you when you're listening to this podcast, we want you to listen to it with your boyfriend. We want you to listen to it with your son, and we want you to have like a good time. This podcast is about having fun with It's like fun with politics, not fun with politicians. This podcast still remains has the appropriate opinions on politicians, but we also believe that politics should be a fun thing to do with your son.
Yeah, something to bring people together.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. This is like a jolly little gay old time.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, before we close, we're gonna do what we normally don't do on this show, which is do like sort of like a reading series on an article that made the rounds on Twitter, on Left Twitter, and I know that most of the articles that make their rounds on Left Twitter are like meaningless, drivel, but this
I also want to say they may cover it in the future, but Chapo has not done this article yet. They're not plagiarizing anything. I don't care if they release an episode tomorrow where this is part of their reading series. We did it first.
Yeah, yes.
Unless it was on a private episode. We do not subscribe to their Patreon.
Yeah, no, I will never subscribe to a podcast Patreon, but if we ever launch a Patreon, you should subscribe to ours. And this
Patreon for me, but not for thee.
This article has driven me actually insane. That's why I want to read it so bad. You were like, oh yeah, I guess we can do this, but it's really important to me. Let me read the title. Some of you have probably heard of this, but The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. This is from Time. This is written by a woman named Molly Ball. I've never heard of Molly Ball before. That's kind of a funny name.
I don't know.
Not familiar with their work. But, okay. Let me just read a few choice quotes from this article, and that'll give you the genuine, gist of it. And then you and I can have a discussion about the impact of this article. Do you have something to say about Molly Balls?
Oh, yeah, she's the author of the 2020 biography of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Okay, all right. Let me just read some quotes here. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. Okay, that's one. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. This is the inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election. They call it a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Do you see why I've been driven insane?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the last one. That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told. Even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream, a well-funded cabal of powerful people, ranging across industries and ideologies, work together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, and steer media coverage and control the flow of information. That literally sounds like something that Alex Jones says.
Yeah, no, that literally sounds like in the next line it's going to be dropping Rothschild and just become this elaborate anti-Semitic conspiracy.
Okay, I'm sorry, but essentially it is the anti-Semitic conspiracy, except it's arguing that it was good.
Yeah, when I see an article that specifically says cabal of powerful individuals in media, that should send off red flags. What this person is saying is not good. They are alluding to something or directly referencing conspiratorial theories that are either indirectly or directly anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and we've said that Trumpism in the future of the GOP is dead on arrival, but I think you can agree that sort of like this right wing conspiracy aspect of the Republican Party that he has normalized is definitely here to stay. Like people that still don't believe the 2020 election was real, QAnon. Like whether it will definitely change and take a lot of different forms as it becomes like less and less about Trump and more about this theory that they're like of like the deep state and pedophile elites, all that fun stuff. That's here to stay, and you need to understand that like that's been going on for since 2016. The popular like conspiracy theories, Pizzagate, QAnon, all these like right wing essentially like cults that perpetrate conspiracy theories. They're usually anti-Semitic in nature. They talk about powerful industries and powerful politicians and
the corporations are bringing communism.
Exactly, like they believe in all that stuff. And this person in this article, this article basically said that all of that is real and it's good.
Yeah, and I think this article is actually, we were talking about like the politics of empathy and how that's becoming like the predominant mode of discourse in like the Democratic Party. Well, if we were to go back like before that, I think this is almost a direct reference to like the sort of politics the Democrats tried to play before that, and that's the neoliberal technocrat.
Yeah.
And that sort of like image like, hey, we're the people that know what we're doing. We're like the men in suits. We're gonna fix everything. We know like how to put all like the little incentives together, like tweak the market, get the government running. It's like your Mike Bloomberg's, I guess your Bill Clintons, your Hillary Clintons to a degree. It's this sort of governmental apparatus that is very much in your business, but it's like they're doing it for the right reasons. Like, they know how to make your life better, so you just need to let them. And that's exactly like the archetype that I'm hearing in that article. It's
both of us keep pointing to my phone when we're talking about the article in disgust.
Yeah. Yeah, we need like a physical object with which to like direct our disgust at. So we're like both pointing at the phone whenever we reference it. But no, it's exactly like this archetype that we see like the QAnon conspiracy emerge out of, is this sort of like, oh, we know what we're doing, it's in your best interest, you won't even know we're here.
Yeah, this is like get in the pod, eat the bugs, like type like stuff that and if you're imagine you're a Trump supporter now who's like, isn't it weird how they found even though they're mail-in votes, isn't it weird how they found millions of votes under the table that like made Joe Biden win even when Trump looked like he was winning? Like, you're gonna read this and your first thought is gonna be, well, I gotta go bomb a state capitol building now. I gotta become a suicide bomber now, because like they're admitting that they stole the election from your guy.
That's exactly how that article reads, and I think that pretending that you are in control, like that article does, when your grip on power is already incredibly tenuous, is a bad idea.
Yeah,
that's a very bad idea. That is inviting bad things to happen.
And also, I feel like we should also say that like part of what this article says probably isn't even true.
Yeah.
Like they're like, I know for a fact there was not an alliance between powerful corporations and left-wing activists. Okay, the people who were over the summer marching in the streets, burning down cop cars, were not meeting behind closed doors with Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, no one was collecting their Soros checks.
Yes. Okay, that part is not true. And the second part is, it says that like the AFL-CIO president collaborated with a bunch of corporations and like that there were like all these like it talks about like things like the Lincoln Project. It doesn't name the Lincoln Project, but and all those things did exist. But to think that they are what pulled this election through, like all these Zoom sessions, like, okay, folks, we're going to talk about moving forward, blah blah blah, get out the vote, all that like liberal, self-aggrandizing, self-masturbatory is an
that's a tautological statement.
Yeah. All that stuff is like, that's not what won Joe Biden the election. No. Like, absolutely. So when it's a right-wing conspiracy theory, it's not true, but it's when these, like, liberals patting themselves on the back, like, we did it, we saved democracy, we are your gods. It's also not true when they say it either. And I think
and it
that's...
actively makes things worse.
Yes, yeah, that's, yeah.
Yeah. Even if you did manage to steal the election, don't write a Time article about that.
Yeah, because you're going to inspire, like, school shootings or some awful bullshit. Because, like...
we saw the Capitol insurrection and how that emerged from basically the belief that the election was stolen and that Trump is the rightful president, and like all the strong feelings that go along with it. And again, I've said it not to defend any of like the Capitol protesters, but if you believed exactly what they do, and like assuming that like you think the election actually was stolen, that like democracy was subverted and all of that, like, yeah, storming the Capitol sounds like something you might do. Now imagine, like, that happens, you're all being thrown in jail, and, like, people are saying, like, no, it wasn't real, and all that. And then, like, you're starting to hear again, like, oh, no, we did steal it. And look where you are now.
You're in jail, and we're in power.
Yeah, that's bad. That's a bad look.
Yeah, like, it's almost making me sympathetic to, like, chud views. Because if you're just gonna come right out and say it, like, also, I sent that article to my friends, and one of them said, like, they're just trying to get the right to kill us, which, like, referring to, like, people of the left, you know, because it's saying that, like, not only is it saying that, like, the deep state anti-Semitic conspiracy theories are true, but it's also saying that cultural Marxism is true, that, like, academia, corporations, and, like, post-Marxist, well, they don't know what a post-Marxist is, but, like, the right-wing Ben Shapiro stuff about how, like, there's, like, this sinister collaboration to destroy free speech. And
and the cultural Marxist thing, again, plays into the anti-Semitic conspiracy.
Certainly,
like the cultural Bolshevism.
Yes, absolutely, certainly. But, yeah, and it, like, a chud is, like, never going to successfully, like, break into the Capitol and, like, hang Mike Pence or Nancy Pelosi or whoever, but, like, it is very believable that some insane QAnon guy could kill a bunch of Black Lives Matter protesters, or, you know, actually marginalize people by saying that they're part of this alliance is putting them in danger, like Activists for Change. You know, it talks about unions a lot. Like, you could see a QAnon, like, first of all, Republicans already believe that unions are, like, communist organizations, so they just don't need another reason to go in there and, like, shoot up a freaking Teamsters building. Yeah,
when we say that, like, activists and organizers deserve credit for this election, this is not what we meant. Like, when we say that, like, organizers in Michigan are responsible for delivering Joe Biden the election, we don't mean that they are, like, working for mega corporations, or that, like, they're part of some weird psyop to, like, undercut the electoral process, or they're, like, breaking into the state house and, like, forcing election law rewrites at gunpoint or whatever.
Yeah, and...
yeah, when it comes down to it, there's a power to grassroots movements that exists. Like, if you get a grassroots movement going, you have, like, popular support, you will be able to pull through elections. Now, sort of illustrating that as some sort of weird, like, undercover covert op to, like, undermine election security and ultimately, like, overthrow Trump's legitimate victory or whatever, because that's what it ultimately sounds like in the, like, throughout the article, as they mentioned that, like, yes, the Republicans were also trying to do this, but we tried harder and we did it better. That's not how you want to describe your electoral victory.
Yeah, like, if you, like, one of the quotes in the article I didn't read was, like, in a way, Trump was right about the election being stolen from... And, like, people over the summer were, like, you know, we're talking about how, like, Chase Bank and Target tweeted Black Lives Matter. Obviously, you don't need to go out in the streets and that was, like, a common, like, every corporation is already on your side. And, like, that, like, I think in a way diminished sort of, like, the goals of the protests. You know, it was a quote-unquote bad look for Black Lives Matter through no fault of their own, but like we're gonna have to try to like the perception of Joe Biden and like the Democrats. We had an episode on this on where how movements die in the Democratic Party. Like, well, they die, and the members of those movements are still there, and now they're the ones that are going to be like used as human shields for Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, yeah, I'd recommend just like going out and reading the article.
Yeah, yeah.
Yourself.
It's yes, absolutely. It's genuine insane. It reads like something you'd see on, not even Fox News, on like OAN about how the election was like stolen.
And it's gloating.
Yeah, yeah, and it, and it drove me insane. It broke my brain in two because like I just realized how awful it was for them to publish that, and how much of a bad look that is for everyone who matters to me. Like every cause that is important to me is like linked to this now. Like the LGBTQ community teamed up with fucking Raytheon.
With Chevron.
Yeah. Like, oh no, they're gonna think trans people are like on Soros payroll now. Like it was just every bad thing about this.
Lockheed Martin says Black Lives Matter.
Exactly. Yeah, that's everything I wanted to say this week.
Yeah, I mean, we ended it on a bit of a doozy.
I think... Yeah, you should definitely read that article and just marvel in, like... Obviously, Molly Ball, whoever she is, it's just some idiot, but, like...
Yeah. Well, in that vein, also, feel free to send us articles that you think are interesting and or absurd to include in our... reading series.
Yeah. Well, this probably isn't going to be a recurring thing, but we will definitely do it again when we find something equally as like bit potential and informative as this is.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's all for this week.
Yeah. See you later, everybody.